And it is on this day, June 4th, 2022, that it has been 1 year since I finished the series, The Codex Alera by Jim Butcher. I have a lot to say, but to start off, to actually introduce what this video is. When I reset my channel and I redid my channel welcome and those kinds of things, I made a decision that I wanted to be able to cover series reviews. But I wanted to cover series reviews in a way that conveyed if I thought the series was worth reading, or if I thought maybe to postpone it on a to be read list. And the first series that would have come up upon making that decision was Codex Alera. And so this is the first video that I am portraying that idea and basically going back and looking at a series a year after I finished it to see if my opinion still holds up, and to say that this series is 100% worth reading in your lifetime and is something that I would even push up on that to be read. And so I went through and I rewatched all my old reviews, which, by the way, I want to take the time to apologize for how cringy and unorganized and terrible and ranty those reviews were. They were so bad. As I was going back to watch through them, they were so bad. And I know I'm still ranty and rambly, but I really hope I'm not that bad. And so I want to take the time to apologize for that, but also continue to say I went through and I rewatched all those. I went through and I skimmed these books again. I didn't read every scene, but I skimmed, not because I wanted to see the scenes that I already read, but because I wanted to see the scenes I forgot, because I definitely forgot a lot of scenes. And I basically returned to the world of Codex Alera and got to measure what is my opinion. 1 year later, do I still love these books as much as I did when I finished them? And that takes us into non-spoilers. Politics, Roman legions, large-scale fighting, so many double crosses that it's almost hard to keep track of. Lots of secrets, immense dramatic irony that it's actually painful to the heart, but in a good way. A bunch of amazing characters that you can get really attached to. Amazing magic, cool creatures and races, occasional strong themes that sometimes come out of nowhere, and epic level descriptions that stick with you forever. Plot turns galore that you never saw coming, and also some of those just next level insane scenes that take you more than one day to actually take in what actually happened in that scene. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. This series, it's fast to read, and I think it is 100% worth the time and memory and cost to read these. I think it is so worth it. And I don't know, I'm not going to be able to convey how much I cherish these books. I cherish these books. I don't just love them. I don't just like them. I cherish reading this series, especially when I went through and I was rereading it. I had so many good memories, going in, and I was excited to be able to return to the world. But while I was reading, I realized just how much I forgot, and I missed this whole big plot line, and I realized just how unique some of the things that happened in this were, and how amazing certain things were written, that it's just stuck with me. It's stuck with me for a very long time. I don't know if I'll ever forget some of the things that happened in this series. I think they're just knowledge in my brain, if that makes sense. And it's just an amazing journey. Throughout all the books, especially rereading them all in a row, rather than having weeks in between each read, like back when I first read it, I'm able to recognize just how much of a journey this series is. And it's just a really fun reread, and I feel that I could continue to return to this world again and again and again throughout my life and still be happy with the series. And so I just want to say that there are so many scenes in this series that would go on my like favorite scenes of all time list. My favorite scenes of all time in anything list, not just books. This series not only has one scene on that list, it has more than one scene on that list, which I really need to make that list because it'd be fascinating to see. And it's just worth it, because when you look back a year after, or years and years and years after looking at the series, a lot of those scenes are what you remember, and just how the feelings are when you're reading them. And I think it's worth the time, and it's worth the money to buy them. I got the physical copies because there's just something about looking at the words on the page that just make it that much more. I feel it in my heart when I was rereading them. And so, worth the time, worth the money. I actually bought 2 copies of a lot of these books. Still worth the money. I'm just so glad I took the time out to read these, and I definitely think they're worth taking the time out to read them. I know that there are people out there that are very critical of the series for like cliches, or like having the young hero kind of thing, but it's the journey, it's the story, it's how well written some of the characters are, it's all the other aspects that come in this series that make it the journey that it is. And so I cherish the series. Something that I said in my review of Captain's Fury was that Captain's Fury as a book wasn't a book based in an ending. What I mean by that is that there are books that like are like very interesting along the way, or like have these like little spikes, but then the ending like makes the whole story. The ending makes all the reveals show up, and the ending like has all these different like takes on the series, and it kind of makes the series in a way. Captain's Fury didn't have a good ending. I mean, it didn't have a bad ending, but it just didn't have an ending that stood out. And the reason why the ending didn't stand out is because literally everything else in the book stood out. There were so many spikes and moments, and like just so much happening in the journey that the ending just couldn't compare. But that was good, because I could look back at the book and be like, this book as a whole is amazing. As a whole, the whole thing was just well done. Boom. Like, maybe had like this one slow bit, but like when you have a book with just that much content that you're like you're breathing about, if you have a slow bit, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's everything else is just so good and so well done that those little things just poof. And really, that's how I feel about the whole series. The whole series is a journey. It isn't like, there isn't like a big ending at the end of the series. Really, there isn't like a huge ending. It's all about the journey along the way, especially with book 3 onward. But that doesn't mean book 1 and 2 were bad either. It's book 1 and 2 are the beginning of the journey. And what book 1 and 2 especially do after you finish the series is when you look back, you can't believe that book 1 and 2 happened. Like, you can't even fathom that with how much this series compounded on itself. And so the series is just so significant, and it had a lot of those like really, really huge moments. But even the in-betweens a lot of the time were satisfying on a reread. And I, again, think that it's the journey along the way that really makes this series stand out to me. Because when I go through and I remember all of the scenes that I, again, have stuck in my head for a year now, and probably will for a lot longer, they're spread out through the series, and they all are like absolutely varying levels of intensity. And it's just fascinating to see that. And so anything I was critical of, which, don't get me wrong, there are things I'm critical of, just gets drowned out by all of that. So, yeah, I can't look negatively at this series, even though I can acknowledge that there are things that I think could have been done better, things that maybe seemed wrong or off or foolish or weird. There are things that I could be critical of, but so worth the time. It is so worth the time, and I really want to make that clear. But at the same time, I'm not just going to let those critiques go. And so I have a spoiler section in this video to talk about the things that I absolutely love and address some of the critiques that I had on the reread. Because when I was doing my reread, I wanted to look for things that were negative. And so here's your chance to leave the spoilers. So you are saved. A lot of my spoilers are still going to be praise, to be honest, but I'll admit some of my critiques. And to get started, my first critique isn't really a critique. It's something based in who I am as a person, and I just want to emphasize, I don't understand romance plots a lot of the time, and that's just part of who I am. And so I can acknowledge that there are like some great moments in romance plots, and there's a lot of things that can come out of those plots, and there are ways for it to be well done. Ding! There are good romance plots. But two of the romance plots in this series, I just felt were empty or forced or just didn't feel natural. They felt weird. And it stuck with me. Like, even in the reread, when I looked back on this series before I did the reread, I still was like, man, I don't feel great about that relationship. And then I started my reread of the series, and I still was like, man, it just doesn't make sense to me on a fundamental level. Just the way it was done, for like the first couple we meet, Amara and Bernard, there was some plot around the relationship that felt very weird, and there was all this like tension between them that didn't make sense to me. I didn't feel like it should have been there. I feel like at that point they shouldn't have felt that way, if that makes sense. If you have read the series, you may know what I mean by that. But there were times that they were making a bigger deal about some of their romance plot, than I feel a deal would have been made out of in real life. And also just, it went fast. It went, when there's those relationships that seem like unrealistically fast, love at first sight kind of relationships, it just feels weird. It doesn't feel natural. And while I did love a lot of the tension that came up with Gaius against them as a result, because some of that was like very like immense, and Captain's Fury happened. I loved that, but at the same time, almost every aspect of their like relationship plot that came out of that, aside from that tension, I feel I could just brush aside, and it wouldn't have been that significant to the plot of what was happening. And so I feel about those two specifically. And part of why, and we'll get into what I think about characters, but part of why I may frown on Amara is because of that relationship plot. It was just so hard to keep track of her through it. And so we'll get more into that when I get into characters. The other side relationship plot that I also felt on, like this one I feel a lot more just shrug, not as like bad or critical on it, was just Fade and Asana. And it came later, and it made more sense to me, a lot more than like Amara and Bernard's, but it still just kind of was just in the background. And it didn't stand out to me as something that was worth remembering on the series, and I just forgot about it. Like, I forgot about every single scene with that happening, except for the ones where they were talking about those like dramatic ironing moments. And so relationships like that in series like this, I don't usually bother remembering them. They don't feel significant to me. I don't see their contribution to the plot sometimes. And I get that like obligation to include extra relationships. I understand that. But it also, I feel it has to feel natural. It has to feel, it doesn't have to be relevant, but it also just, you know, do you guys know what I mean? It has to feel like it makes sense between those characters. And so that was my like vague critique, not critique, was that I just didn't understand those two relationships. The main relationship, Tavi and Katai, all day. I understood that one. That one was clear, made sense. I could, like, it felt real. It felt like actually like meant to be there. It didn't feel forced, or it didn't feel empty. And so that was my very first vague thing. But I kind of alluded to it, but Katai, Tavi, Eren, Fidelius, Marcus, Varg, Gaius, all of those characters aged like fine fucking wine for me. I love them so much, and I missed them so much without realizing it. And even though every single time I thought back to the series, I thought about those characters, I still just didn't realize how significant those characters are to me and how much I cherish them and love them and everything. And the existence of those characters, honestly, already balances out my confusion on the whole romance thing, because those characters are freaking amazing. And even with the whole romance thing, in the end, I still like and respect Bernard as a character. I like his abilities and that kind of thing. Amara jumped too much back and forth, and something I commented on one of my reviews is that she didn't play much of a role. When she was supposed to be an important role, like a huge role, there were times that she still just didn't do much at all. And then she has all these opinions, and she like jumps around a lot with her like perspective, and she was constantly changing to the point where it's too much. And I still have a negative impression of her in the long run. There are moments where I loved her. There are moments where I hated her. And what I'm left with now is just not positive. I said negative, and it kind of is negative, but it's a not positive, like, interpretation of her, even after rereading the series is sitting on it for a year. And, you know, it's fine to not like a main character. And so that's what I want to say on that. Interestingly, though, against the contrary, the character that I like greatly disliked and hated through the majority of my first read of this series, Isana, I like her. I like her now, and she did terrible things, and I still like cannot believe the terrible things she did. But at the same time, all of her character growth and all of those like themes and like moments where she's like has all of that guilt she has about everything she did, seeing her grow from that kind of repaired my opinion of Isana in the end. And I think that was very fascinating, that I actually kind of like Isana as a person later in the series. I mean, she did terrible things, but I don't hate her like I did when I read the first books, or I don't feel she was like iffy or like made no sense. I like her character growth, and it really repaired my opinion of her. And while they can be funny or have a significant role or save the day, I'm shrug at Max and Fade. They aren't bad characters. but they aren't characters that stand out to me. I mean, either they bring the comedy, or they, again, save the day, or they have their, like, side romance plots, or whatever. They just don't stand out to me. It's not that they're bad, and it's perfectly normal for characters not to stand out, but, you know, a lot of the scenes that have those two in them, I forget a lot more, because they just don't stand out. And then there's characters like Arnos and other bad guys. Bransice. I know I'm missing all of these names. I want to apologize right now for every name I mispronounce. Most of them are bad guys. Some of them are just side characters. I completely forgot about a lot of them. Like, just completely forgot. And some of it was because they weren't significant. But some of it was because they were either absurd, which is my critique, or they were just terrible, terrible people, and thus I forgot them. So examples there are like Calare, I said Bransice, I said Arnos, there's that guy in the first book, don't remember his name, even though I just reread the series, I already forgot his name. They just all passed my memory. And really, upon a reread, what those characters are actually doing for me is they are causing the plots that bring up the scenes that make me bask in the characters I do love. And so, I still can't, like, I still don't pay the most attention to their roles, especially though, if they are absurd. And the example of that I have is Arnos, because when I was rereading all of those scenes, I was like, what the hell? This character has, like, an important role in this book and is causing all kinds of plot. And I just forgot him because he was just absurd. He was a senator that was fine with killing civilians. Which, I feel like a senator is supposed to represent civilians. And so he just came in with that opinion, like right off the bat. He came in with the intention of just ruining everything. And there wasn't an explanation behind why he was the way he was. He was just that guy who came in and did that. And so it was just ironic and insane. So I forgot. I just set aside all of that happening and just focused on all the things that I did love and enjoy on the book. And so that was something I completely lost until I did my reread. And, you know, some of those, especially certain scenes that I'm thinking about, could have been done better, but also it works. Like, the series still comes together, it all leads up, it causes some scenes to happen, and so if it worked, it worked. The series is good. The series is good. It's alright. It's alright that, you know, there were some things that were weird and could make me, like, as I'm reading them. But still, when you look back at it, it's still just, when you look back at these books, they're great. Those things can really just fade. So, I think that's fine in the end. The last thing I wanted to say about characters, and just because it really makes a statement about what I think on them, there are times, the last few months, that I will be like doing chores or doing homework or something, and I will just randomly remember a scene with Kitai or Tavi or Gaius or Marcus or Varg. Like, I will randomly remember a scene with one of those characters, and I'll just start grinning. I mean grinning. Like, evil, maniacal, happy grin. And I'm like, damn it, I don't have the time to reread that scene, but I'm thinking about it in my head, and I'm able to replay it in my head. And just to be able to do that with characters is just awesome. to randomly just be like, remember that one time? I don't get that feeling as much with books, actually. I don't. And so this is a series where I have that feeling. But, you know, it's been a year now, and I've been reading all these other books during that, and I've realized that I don't have that happen with a lot of books. And so I want to mention that these characters really stuck with me, and I really got attached to them. And I love them so much. Next. Moving on from characters, we get into an aspect about this series that actually doesn't get talked about as much. Maybe it does, and I just don't realize it, but something that I didn't talk about in my reviews was all the little tiny details and digs into Roman history. Like, I maybe talked about, like, the ruins of Appia and those kinds of things. I'm sorry if I missed that. But really, some of this series, especially as I'm going through it in a reread, fast-paced, kind of gives a little bit of those echoes of historical fiction, which I haven't gotten to read, like, truly for a while now, and I might have to get into soon. It has those kind of echoes of historical fiction, but, you know, it's still fantasy and military and all those other themes. But I really like the things that those details bring into the story, especially when it has to do with, like, knowledge or, like, indirectly just the existence of having history brings, like, causes part of the plot. I think that's actually fascinating in how it was done, and I really like how Butcher did it, and as always, he went through and he did his research on it. And so I really appreciated how he included Roman history and how it just linked to our timeline as humans also a lot of the time. And what that also leads to is the themes that came from doing that about humanity and feminism and slavery. And because this is based in Roman history, it links back to us as humans, as people, and so we can have these themes on how we are and how we were and how we still are. And I think that a lot of those themes could be really strong. But sometimes it depended on the context when he was doing it. I feel there were times where it felt more just, I don't really see where this theme is going right now. But there were other times, especially later on with the series, that, especially when it started dividing Alera or echoed other parts of our history or brought tension and, like, politics into the picture, that I liked those kinds of themes a lot more, and I feel they could really start to stand out. And so I could really appreciate that, and it brought some, like, great moments, and it brought some great quotes from characters, but at the same time, it also brought some really morally ambiguous scenes that, first of all, are so insanely morally ambiguous, you're not going to forget that stuff in your life. And second of all, can kind of link back to perspectives and the idea that sometimes you can't fix, not sometimes, flat out, you can't fix, like, the terrible things of society. It's just how it is and how it's going to be. This is my cynical opinion. I'm sorry. But regardless of, like, if you reach the point that they've reached in this series, it doesn't matter what happens, it's going to be bad. There's no good outcome. There's no good outcome, regardless. The existence of that kind of conflict is already just going to bring an end to the way society is. And I think it's just fascinating to see that in a book, because no, I had never seen anything like that in a book before. And it's just so, it just sticks. It really sticks. And so I think it's very significant to read that, and also read that in the first place, but also to reread it and feel all of those factors just weighing, and then see the choice made and just know what is going to happen when this choice is made. It's it's an experience. So I really wanted to point that out. On a positive note, however, because a lot of the stuff I just alluded to was... on a positive note, however, there were a lot of themes about humanity just sprinkled throughout the series, and there's ones about resilience and coming together and creative thinking and the fact that humans are more than their abilities and their skills, and also that Tavi was just proving to the world that people don't need magic to be brilliant and have an impact and be a significant leader. And, just stuff like that. They may sound cliche, they may be full of stereotypes, but I'm usually... back when I read this series, I commented a lot about cliches, but now that I've read around, I kind of respect the cliche. I like that those themes came up, and especially with how they were done, with those, just random discussions on, humanity and history, and not needing to be like everybody else, and what makes an Aleran and not a Merad. Those discussions were actually really open, and I feel they actually they just really fit whenever they came up. It just felt it fit the world and the scene, and I really respected that was done. And regardless of any cliche, if there was a cliche, I still just felt it fit, and I couldn't frown at it. And so I really like that with the series, and something you will see with other people reviewing the series is cliche and talking about it. But I think, again, everything else balances it out, and it's also just sprinkled throughout. And so I think it's well done. On another note, one second. Oh, the throat's getting dry. On another note, there's the magic system, which is still awesome and unique, with the fire lamps and the counters against the different kinds of magic. I say different kinds. Counters against the different kinds of furies. Just how water magic and how it works, and the fact that water magic requires water and tubs, and all of that links back to aqueducts, which links back to Roman history. I love just how interconnected the magic system is, but also just how unique it is and how it's used. It's used fascinatingly. There's characters that are characters come up with the most unique ways to use the magic, and I love seeing just how creative those kinds of things get, especially with fooling people or trickery or those kinds of things. But I also, again, like the themes that come with it that show you don't need magic to do things. And so the magic system is complex in its own way, but at the same time it's kind of direct. And so I really respect the magic system, and I still think that it's unique. I will say that metal crafting, even after a reread, is a little confusing to me. I understand some of the things it does, but it also just doesn't feel that significant to the other kinds of crafting, even though I know it's what makes a great swordsman. It's a little confusing to me. I guess I'm just dull-minded to the point that I don't get it, but it's the kind of magic that's more based in the fact, oh, a character's using it, rather than oh, it is doing this, if that makes sense. And so it's really good for duels and those kinds of scenes, but I'm not a duels and those kinds of scenes person. I like a lot of that impromptu, dirty fighting, or armies or those kinds of things. And so metal crafting didn't stand out to me, but it also still has its significant role in the story, and I still like it, and it really just completes the image of the magic. So I just want to comment on that. Something that I found fascinating rereading this series, and something that I talked about with another series I reread a lot. This series, the plot reveals and the shocks and all the secrets and those kinds of things did not get old. They did not get old at all. Even though I was replaying them in my head over and over again throughout the whole year, they did not get old. Rereading them again, I'm still just woo! I recorded a tiny bit of myself just gushing as I was rereading the pages. It doesn't get old. It's really satisfying on a reread, and even if you know the reveal, going back and reading the reveal reminds you of what you like first thought when you read it. So good. It's exactly what I get out of Skin Game, which is a book from the Dresden Files. I've reread that book at least 8 times in my life, probably more than that. I can keep rereading it because I just get that giddy feeling. I get that giddiness rereading the series. And so not only is the series great on a first read, but I feel it actually holds up to rereads as well. If you are willing to skip the occasional one of those things that I mentioned earlier, that it just feels off, or it's just that, like, it's just an asshole being an asshole. To be blunt about it, you know, but I think they're still amazing rereads, and especially with the big scenes, it hits. It hits even after, especially the ambiguous scenes. You still just like don't know how to react, even though you've read it so many times. And so it's great on a reread. It's good. It's worth it. I admit that sometimes when I was rereading the series, there were times where the characters were like arguing unnecessarily and it was going nowhere, or they made decisions that seemed really illogical. Stupid example, but like if someone says, I'm going to meet you here, and then you're like, I'm not going to meet them there. I'm going to go see if I can meet them somewhere else. Why? You know when things like that, they're very small, they're very tiny, but it's just illogical, and it causes plot, but you're just like, why? Moments like that happen. There are times where characters repeated themselves at least like 4 to 5 times on like, what is this weakness? Or like say something over and over again, and the other characters just ignored them or like asked again a few chapters later. That sometimes felt forced and unnecessary. That especially happened earlier on in the series. It's just sometimes the characters repeated themselves a lot. Like, a lot. So that stood out, and sometimes there were just some plain stupid decisions, which can make a good point about how humans are stupid, because that's true. But also, sometimes there needs to be some sense to balance, and the author did include a lot of that, like, sense to balance out a lot of decisions. But sometimes, there's just sometimes a scene where it's not as much. And so, again, going back to what I said about, like, the characters I forget because they were jerks, or the characters I forget because they felt absurd. There are also some scenes and interactions between people that I forget because they were repeating themselves, or it felt like they were making a foolish decision that no way in 9 hells did I believe that a person would actually think to do. And I'm sure a person would actually think to do, but I still am just like, why? 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 I did the same thing with Mistborn, and so it's a critique that I have sometimes. And it's good to have those characters that, you know, are making stupid decisions, but also I feel people can know to listen sometimes. And so there's a balance, but also, again, as I've been saying so many times over, it wasn't on my mind at all before rereading the series. What I remembered looking back at this series is not that. I forgot about that. It just faded into the back of my mind. And so to conclude, to show what really, like, stuck with me with the series, like what impression was left in my brain, I made a list. It goes something like this. Tabby finding the corpse of a mutilated sheep and then being attacked and having to make the decision to run and abandon his uncle was a hell of a start. But then there was Facing the Pit against Kitai, which like absolutely hooked me in the series and was very intense in its own unique way. And then there was Gaius passing out and like possibly dying, which came out of nowhere and was a shocker. Max was doing this like the most insane stupid thing I've ever read in a book ever, trying to lie to Gaius' wife. And it was absolutely hilarious, but it was also the most stupid thing I've ever read, and ugh. Gotta get that out. And then there's that Gaius Marcus scene where like there's that regret, but there's also that knowing, and there's that like, damn it, we're enemies, but like also we're friends. Fucking gold. And then that was followed by, like, directly, like, the next page was followed by the Tavi Kitai on and off scene, which is, like, wholesome and adorable, but also very significant, but it was also funny as hell. Freaking amazing scene. Gaius fucking exploded a volcano and committed genocide, which was after he was floating 10 feet in the air and just went, he did, like, the laying of the sheep, like, wipe, and just all those people died. Exploded a volcano, committed genocide, but just holy shit to all of that. Like, that entire sequence, that entire sequence where he's making people, like, feel fear and everything. He was just a god. Oh, it sets my hair on end. It's still, no matter how many times I reread it, sets my hair on end. It's so fucking good. You're not going to get another experience like that reading any other series. Oh, yes, you will. But it's so unique to this series that it's great. Alera's appearances, I mean, you know, very tiny thing that can actually be a little forgettable, but Alera's appearances and, like, how, like, mysterious and foreign and how much we don't actually know about her, and him casually talking to her while, like, Eren was watching, is actually a very satisfying, memorable scene. Also, Eren on the horse chase, while, like, when he was, like, spying on the horde, and the guy next to him, like, died, and he was just trying to get away, as the start of a book, and we didn't even know it was Eren. That was really nice, and just a surprise at, like, how well done that was. There's that moment where Gaius, it's always Gaius, fucking Gaius. Gaius kamikaze himself with the whole capital of Alera just to, like, postpone the horde. That's another scene that you will never forget the description of that scene. There's the water scene with the Leviathans, which is actually one of the most memorable scenes I've ever read, because I have aphantasia and it stuck with me. There's a long story there, but that scene may not stand out to other people, but it means something to me. And it's another scene that I just cherish. So that was just generally amazing. And also ship journeys. I never got to read ship journeys before, so all of those ship journey scenes, really interesting. Fucking Marcus. We haven't even gotten to Marcus yet. Marcus preparing that poison arrow or not arrow, but like the Canum Balis. He was like putting poison on the Canum Balis for like 2 paragraphs, and then the chapter started with the duel, and then there was the whole fucking duel. But then in the middle of the duel, the entire time you're like, which one is he gonna shoot? Which one is he gonna shoot? Is Marcus gonna? Because you know Marcus was that entire sequence, and then the chapter afterward where Marcus like thought he was dead. Ah, so good. Oh my god. And then even after that, there's like all of those like undertones and like going against his orders, and also like when he's found out, there's that moment where, oh god, what's his name? No, the maestro guy, he was like, Fit Elias, and he turned around. That's another moment, never gonna leave my brain. It's so fucking good. And then there's that moment where Tavi, like, after that scene is like, crucify him. Marcus is one of the best characters I have ever seen written. He was just so well written on every level. Terrible person. Great bad guy, but he was that, like, bad guy, good guy. One of the best characters I have ever read. Ever. He's so fucking good. Everything Marcus related in this entire series I could reread. So I just want to say Marcus is fucking great. But also moving on, there's reveals that come out of nowhere that like you're like, whoa, what? And an example of that would be like the Chala reveal with Kitai, and you know, right after that there's that like really wholesome scene where Tavi's like, you're not alone. And that really stuck with me, especially with the timing of me reading this series. So I really like that. There's also, I mean, you know, going back to Cursor's Fury, there's that reveal that Isana was not only with Septimus romantically, but also had Tavi and was his mom, but also did terrible things to Tavi. All of those reveals were just, to me, I was shocked. And so, also the fact that that was told by Araris, that caused all kinds of plot lines. Also great. Isana, also, as a result of learning those things, all of Isana's conversations with Gaius, where there's all the undertones, I mean, all of the undertones, fascinating. And, I mean, to end off this really, really, really long list, there's the pregnant scene. There's the pregnant scene. Pregnant? Usually I would be like, on that kind of plot line, but also it was just well done, especially with the camp being attacked right after that. The timing and all of it just set my heart on end with the entire rest of the story. And so there are just so many memorable moments in this series. And when I think about this series, I thought about every single thing on that list before my reread. And so I cherish this series. I can go back and think about those scenes and just think, what a journey. Well, I'm so glad I read this series. It's worth it. Move it up your read list. It's shorter in some ways than the Dresden Files. And it is packed. And it is quick. So, I think this is worth it. I just spent 45 minutes talking about how much it was worth it. I promise. It's good. It's good. It has its bad moments. It has the things to be critiqued about. It has some things that maybe it's written bad. But I seriously think that, especially when you let it sit for a while after you finished it, it'll be worth it to you. Alright, what's new and what's next? Well, you see, I was so busy rereading the series and freaking out about those scenes that I haven't read a page of Caliban's War yet, even though I said I would. I actually did mean to read the prologue that night. I just didn't, because I picked up Academ's Fury instead. So I promise I'll get to this book. I'm on it. Not tonight, but tomorrow. I promise I will start the series. I promise. I will start it if it's the last thing I do. I said start this series. I've already started the series. I'll start this book. I promise. I did see, though, that it's a new character. Curious. So, I'm excited to read it. I just got so fully caught up in rereading the thing that is Codex Alera. I've not bought any new books, though I actually almost did, but I decided not to. But I think soon it's due time to buy another book, and so we'll see what book I buy next. Other than that, nothing else for what to do and what's next. I do have one like little mini final announcement. My other YouTube channel is officially public if you are interested in watching me talk about these things. It is Pride Month, so happy Pride Month if you celebrate that. But if you want to see me talk about that aspect of my life, it is shown in my descriptions on the main page of the channel. But otherwise, have a good one, and I will see you guys when I finish the next book. Goodbye.